turn on the recording. Look, you're very, very welcome. This is the second BCKR Non-Executive Director Program, and we'll have one or two participants from the pilot program joining us throughout. They're very willing to share their experiences and ideas with you. Today is an introduction to the 5-week program. And my job today is really to explain how we're going to work together. What's my role? What's Elizabeth's role or BCKR's role? What's your role? Today, I'm just going to set out the whole program framework. What can you expect? And there is a bit of work involved in this, but you can go at your own pace. And basically, my job is to just guide you and cajole you throughout the entire program and after the program. And I realize some of you are working full-time. You know, you might be looking longer term for non-exec roles. Well, maybe it's not appropriate to look now. Maybe it is. But for example, I've been looking at your CV, but also looking at your online presence. What your LinkedIn visible online profile says about your search for non-exec. Maybe that's appropriate to put up. For some of you, it may not be appropriate to put up yet, depending on your circumstances. We'll work through all that. Today is about how do we build a community where you guys work together with Elizabeth's support, with BCKR support, and with my support to build a community. And sometimes when we're not in lockdown or COVID situations, if people want to meet up, often the groups meet. You know, a few times a year, whatever, we have lunch, just to catch up and get some support, one-to-one coaching, that sort of thing, to create that community. Each program will be 90 minutes. We're normally always on schedule. So I will start at 9 o'clock and finish at 10:30. And I'm going to explain then the preparation between the programs, because there is some prep, and you'll have to get your head around the whole role, responsibilities, the governance issues of being a non-exec. Does anyone here, before we get into this, what's your knowledge of being a non-exec? Do you think you know a lot about it, or is this your introductory first into the water sort of thing? Any comments from anyone?
Well, I guess I'm in a place of knowing a little bit about it as having been company secretary for my employer for some period, and both during a period when we had non-execs. So experienced being in the room with them, but now we're in a position where we have just a purely executive board. But then I haven't held any non-exec positions myself. That's where I am.
And you have an understanding. It's interesting that you're with Capital One Group, yes?
Yeah.
It's interesting. Do you know why they just went to a complete executive board and not included non-execs? Any ideas?
I know exactly. To be frank, it was to take out a bunch of administration, I guess. I mean, clearly what you lose with that is external insight, external challenge. But we felt we were getting that from our parent in spades, and therefore, because we were in a position where we were allowed to not have non-execs by the regulator, we chose that route. I mean, I think it'll be an interesting debate as to how long we can stay in this position, to be honest. But for the moment, we're taking advantage of it. If it is an advantage, which is, again, in the balance for debate, right?
And balance is the right word there. You're absolutely right. Rebecca and Abby, any what's your understanding of non-execs? Any background history in that area?
For me, I think this is a bit of a, part of the reason I joined up to this is for me to learn a bit more about it and get a bit more understanding. For me, I'll kind of talk a bit through in a bit more detail when I kind of go through my introduction, but through what I'm doing at the moment, I'm kind of, I'm hoping to kind of launch my own kind of IP service. And through doing that, I'm kind of learning quite a bit about how businesses work. And that's my kind of interested in it. But I'm kind of looking a bit more longer term for me. I've got quite a bit going on at the moment, but it's something in the back of my mind that I'd quite like to do in the future. And I kind of want to be prepared for that and know about it when the kind of right time arises, really.
Very good. And Abby, in future, if you want any assistance, just ask, because I also run programs on how you become a consultant, as distinct from a non-exec, because they are very distinctive. And if ever you just have any questions, it's all on my computer, costs you nothing to ask. I wish you well on that. And Rebecca, comments from you?
Yeah, For me, it's really starting out. My youngest is 6, so I've pretty much had 9 years out of the legal profession. So, well, on and off with a bit of consultancy work in the middle.
Yeah.
So it's really now for me looking into next steps and without going back into full-time work. So
well, can I say there's one redeeming point for all of you. The great thing is that are all of you in work currently?
no.
No, okay. So, the majority of you are. If you are in work, you can use this time to build a network. And networking is so critical to moving into the non-exec arena. It's just use your network. And I'm going to spend a bit of time during the program. How do you leverage your current network? And Rebecca, I can work with you. How do you create one, depending on that network? But you use your contacts and ask them the questions. Who do you know that could introduce me to those who would make decisions on becoming a board member? If you can use your network, it's really an active reference you talk about. Personal introductions are really, really essential. You can leverage your network. Now's the time to do it. Before you actually go full time, if you do that, your career. So it's getting the balance right. Okay, Elizabeth, any comments from you in terms of, can you just explain your background in kind of boards and working with committees, etc.?
I was a partner at Slaughters. I was born and bred there, so I went straight from university, did my training contract there, stayed there for 20 years. I have 4 children, as I've mentioned, and by the time I'd done it for 20 years, I'd done fabulous big M&A roles and did a lot of HR work, both with trainees and secretaries and training program within the firm, and did a lot of interviewing of trainees, but decided that I'd sort of done it, and that my eldest 2 were then 10 and 12, and they're the ones that are now 18 and 21. And I suppose I felt that if I waited, I'd have slightly missed the boat of them growing up. So went to the non-exec idea, wanting to stay close to business, somewhat akin actually to sort of Abby's idea of wanting to learn a bit more, using my advisory skills, but actually at the board table. So was lucky enough to land my first role with Great Portland Estates, which is a FTSE 250 commercial real estate company. And I did that just as I was leaving Slaughters, purely by networking and chance and the stars aligning, which we can obviously talk about in more depth during this course. But so that was networking. I then wanted to see slightly the other end of the real estate world, just to balance it out, because while people say getting your first role is difficult, it turned out that getting your second role isn't very easy either. So I applied for 2 housing associations, 2 big respected housing associations. They had very similar forms, and one of them said, "Thank you very much, well, be in touch if we're interested," and the other gave me the job, and I'd filled them in remarkably similar ways. So again, my skill set was the same, my words were the same. So that was through formal application. My third role came through a headhunter calling up, and he'd seen my profile on LinkedIn, very important, as now I'll tell you, on having the sort of real estate and legal and slightly landlord focus within a housing association, plus commercial development within GPE. And I went on the board of an AIM listed company, and the AIM listed company was a residential block manager, sort of effectively a property services company. Very different style, a tiny board, classic, thinking in particular of Abby and Rebecca, a classic sort of male, late 50s, early 60s set of personalities sitting around the board table. So that definitely came from a headhunter. My next one, I joined the board of Mountview Theatre School. Now that came from an introduction from a BCKR speaker. We again just followed up on that networking, but was lucky enough to meet in the first place. They were doing a very large joint venture with Southwark Council to build a new theatre school down in Peckham, and I live in Dulwich, so it was nice and close. And so I've sat on that board. And then again, thinking a little bit of Abbey, I went back to a tiny bit of legal work, and I've been out of it for 6 years, 7 years, and thought non-exec is great in as far as it goes, but I wanted a little bit more complete a finisher, which you don't get ever in the non-exec world. So I decided I'd have a go at sort of doing consulting alongside, and I joined Keystone to do my consulting. And I was introduced to one client who then a few months later asked me to go onto their board. So it's a private setup. I did their first shareholder equity documents, which frankly I could do standing on my head, having done big ticket M&A before. I've really enjoyed the small boards. But alongside all of this, I've realised that what really matters is not the size or the style or even the industry of the relevant company, but whether you genuinely think you have something to add. And going forward, I'm now very conscious of what I want and the sort of thing I'm after, but I certainly wasn't in that position at the beginning. So for example, I know that REM serves me well in terms of being a little bit rigorous. There are rules to apply, there are formula to take, there are tensions to deal with. You've got to work through the potential conflict between management and investor. And so going for a REM chair was going to be my next step, which I did with Interserve. And in April, just as lockdown started, I went and became chair of the Interserve board, or the Interserve REMCOM. Slightly peculiar, because Interserve, you may recall, had a whole load of financial difficulties, went bust, was bought out by its lenders, and they now, so it is now a very large private company in breakup mode. So it's in some ways a short-lived assignment, which again is something that all the non-execs are. But over the space of time, I've also failed to get quite a lot of roles, and that's part of the package when you set out on a non-exec piece as well. As for my bigger picture, now obviously still the 4 kids, I still do a tiny bit of consultancy, but I actually find it quite difficult to marry all 3 roles, because I think consulting and non-exec, well, the legal side requires deadlines and impromptu, and you're not in control of your time. And the non-exec, other than in crisis mode, and yes, we've had plenty of that in the last few months, is gloriously predictable often, but absolutely set in stone. There is no moving it. If you miss your child's first day at school or their graduation, bad luck. So it swings and roundabouts. And I run BCKR. I joined up as I left Slaughters with Tim and Guy, and the 3 of us now run it with Nicola's help as an administrator. I do that because I discovered pretty quickly that being a lawyer was as negative in the world of non-exec as being a female was positive at the time. And we wanted to do something to overcome that. And the networking I've done through it and the stories I've heard and tell are able, hopefully, to sort of at least enlighten and encourage others to join the fray and just step out of their comfort zone a little bit. Because I think if you don't step out of your comfort zone, you're not really personally developing either. And that was part of what I wanted to do something different for. Sorry, that was rather a long explanation.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Well, look, Elizabeth has created a portfolio career. She mentioned Guy, she mentioned Tim. The three of them will come in and out of the program to share their experiences so that we can learn from past mistakes. And that's the key of this, and how you move forward, learn from that, and create your own portfolio careers. Maybe a combination of interim work, it could be a combination of non-exec work, it could be a combination of consultancy work, as Elizabeth has mentioned, but it could be a combination that you decide. Our job is to support you in that, and make sure that you don't make the mistakes that we all made. You know, I've been a non-exec for over 25 years, and I didn't even know I was a non-exec when I took my first job. I had no idea really what I was walking into. I learned very fast, and we're just going to share those experiences. And Rupert, you mentioned about the Capital One board. Can all of you tell me, what do you think is the distinction between being an executive board member and a non-executive board member? What is the big difference between those two? Any ideas from anyone?
My instinct kind of tells me that the non-exec role is there to kind of give a bit more impartiality and be a kind of outside head on it all.
Totally independent. And how do they, Abby, absolutely right, but how do they show that independence? What is their role? What do they do then to determine that independence? Any ideas from anyone? Because this is what you'll be doing as a non-exec. Rupert?
Well, I think it's this balance between being supportive, I guess, and being challenging and trying to juggle those things. I think that, is it that in effect you're sort of not responsible for the sort of day-to-day decision making, but more trying to bring a bit more of a macro view to support the exec, but also to ensure that they're delivering to the various stakeholders.
Yes, that's exactly right. You know, a non-exec and an executive director role under law is seen as the same thing. You know, but the point is the non-executive is not an employee, where the executive has employee day-to-day management responsibilities. The non-exec, as Abby, as you have said, and Rupert, you're there as an independent observer. You're there to challenge and oversee and make sure that the board and the organization does its business according to governance principles, regulatory principles. It does the right thing for its stakeholders and end users. And you're there as an impartial observer, and you've got to give that feedback, to start to challenge, to ask all those awkward questions. That's the role. But under law, there's not really a distinction between a non-exec and, well, there's no regulatory framework around being a non-exec. There are lots of guidelines, and we're going to go through those guidelines today. Elizabeth, any comments before we move on?
No, that's
No,
fine.
very good. Okay, best practice. I can see you're all using the mute button very well, so you're all well versed, it seems to me, with Zoom. Look, just raise your hand. Any questions, just launch in any stage. No problem with that. Look, I'm just going to go through now. What's the course purpose? What's the program content? And I'll be flexible on that. If anybody wants to go off on a particular tangent or route, I will do that with you. I have no problem with that. What happens between the sessions? How are we going to work? And then we'll come to the personal introductions. And then I'll wrap up the program today. Okay, so look, the course purpose. And really, it took me a while to kind of grasp this, but it's really to help you with the behaviors to transition from your current executive role, full-time role, into a part-time, non-exec, or even consulting role. But I will be concentrating here on the non-exec side of things. Ask me any questions you want on the consulting side. And how do you then move, the whole idea of that is, how do you move from someone external, an external advisor, and I'm thinking of maybe a kind of a lawyer who is in a kind of employed by a firm, but you're actually giving external advice. And Rupert, I don't know, you're in general counsel, you know, but you're in-house and you're giving a feedback. But it's even when you're in-house, you're external, but now you're going to move from offering advice and then moving into making decisions. And that is a big shift for a lot of people. So you're part of really the decision-making process. As an advisor, you might give the advice and then the board goes off and has their meetings and they actually discuss what you brought to the table. But now you're part of that discussion. I'm going to be looking at here is, well, how do I deliver those behaviors and give security and give the feedback and constructive criticism in ways that people will want to listen to you? That's really important. Your behavior is critical in all this. And that's really how people judge you, your behavior. Rupert.
Yeah, just a really quick question tied into that was a comment that you made, Elizabeth, about negativity in relation to lawyers. And I just wondered, as you're talking about the sort of overall purpose, just understanding some of that challenge would be super helpful.
Okay. I mean, broadly, lawyers are paid by the hour to correct detail and explain in some commercial eyes why commercial people can't do what commercial people want to do. And they come along and they put full stops in and add commas and they say, no, you can't do it that way, you've got to do it this way. We all know lawyers, sadly, that are like that, so we can't pretend that the stereotype isn't based in some reality for some people. But we also know lawyers who are fully engaged, part of the team, commercially astute, say, don't worry about that, move on, I'll sort that for you, let's worry about the big picture, what are you actually trying to get out of it? And most significantly, we have all been in meetings and online, when meetings were allowed, when you have two people that come into a room, I suppose this was my experience so often, saying, right, we've done a deal, and the negativity that the lawyers bring is actually well, you've done a deal, what do you actually both mean by this? And it turns out that they mean do deal A and the other person means do deal B. So disappointing, helpful and inevitable lawyering can lead to people having a mindset that says lawyers can be brought in when needed and haven't got any other skills. Historically, were Guy and Tim here, they would tell you that when they started at Allen & Overy and Slaughters, their senior partners, not in a capital S, but were all on the boards of Barclays, NatWest, BP, and that's how you both gained the respect of clients, got your commercial awareness, kept close to people, knew what was going on. Then, the rise of the chargeable hour, the imposition of perfectly sensible conflict rules that meant that you had to be seen not to be in a position of conflict, plus the meant that lawyers pulled themselves back from having public external interests in the commercial sphere. At the same time, the accountants and the regulations all changed so that you sort of had to have the rise of the audit committee, and who can run an audit committee? Only somebody who knows audit and accounts. So at the same time as the lawyers were sort of pulling themselves off and have to some extent themselves to blame, the accountants were pushing themselves forward as call them financial bean counters, or call them actually people who at that stage were hugely influential and useful. What's happened in more recent times is that even, you talk to the partners at Deloitte and KPMG, and there are plenty of accountants who have made it very successfully in the portfolio world, but many, many more who haven't, because they are pictured in their stereotype. How do you overcome it? Well, that's part of this course, but you overcome it by being more than a lawyer. It is the case that we the rise of the General Counsel has put a gap between very senior management and senior partners in law firms. The General Counsel wasn't there 30 years ago. No, you relied on law firm, you relied on relationship. Law has, even at a high level, become almost a commodity business where people aren't able to judge it. It goes out to a procurement house. No relationship opportunities are present to build. There are clearly, many, many exceptions, but in a big picture, and lawyers are quite secretive about how law firms work. They're not seen as businesses. Guy would say that he went to a headhunter and said, okay, what would you say if you had somebody who'd been in charge of a business that had, I don't know what the number is, let's say 12,000 people, worked in 26 countries, had a profit margin of 40%, was the first into various organizations, was best of class, and did so on a tiny bit of debt. And the headhunter said, well, that would be amazing, absolutely amazing. Well, there you go, that's Allen and Overy, because he was senior partner there. Oh, but isn't that a law firm? Well, as if law firms don't have people problems, law firms don't have IT problems, law firms don't have regulatory problems. You never read about the mechanisms of how law firms work or when they go up and under in the FT. You read about the commercial world. All you get in the public sphere for lawyers is that they earn a lot of money. And that they, on occasions where you're talking to chairman and chief execs, that lawyers make them stay up all night in waiting for documents to sign. Nobody wants somebody like that on their board. So you have to be more than that.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, that's helpful. That's helpful.
And Elizabeth, thank you. And it was a great question, Rupert. I've been helping people become non-exec directors for about 6 years. And anytime I hear any company that's wanting to employ a non-exec and they want a lawyer, the only reason why they want a lawyer, in my experience, is, oh, we've got lots of contracts. And they might be very good at the negotiation, but it's only from the legal perspective. They never see you as an individual that can contribute to the big commercial picture. That's what this whole stereotyping is out there. And, oh, a lawyer, they ask difficult questions. And you'll find this, particularly in private companies, people bring on these non-execs, and the non-execs are there to challenge. But then people say, why are you asking me all these questions? Often they don't like it. So you've just got to adapt your style to what works in that environment, because you've got to do your job. That's a must, but you've got to do it in ways that actually brings more people with you and turns people against you. So, and that's what we mean about these behaviors. How do you move from only being seen as a lawyer? You'll always be a lawyer, but moving to those non-exec behaviors. You're not a cheap route only legal advice. And that's the key point. We're really going to be working on. So make sure that you come across as an individual where everything that's required for the role, you can demonstrate credibility so that you can give personal security. But getting through those getting through the barriers of the whole steps to kind of, getting through to interview. And then, what do you say at interview, et cetera, et cetera. And then when you get into the boardroom, how do you manage your relationships? So people will recommend you to other boards, to that networking group. Okay, what's the program content? Today I'm going to introduce introduction session 1. After we introduce ourselves, just go through a little bit on governance and boardroom dynamics, and really concentrate more on the individual behavior or style of the non-executive. Session 2, really going to get into the nub of things, and you're going to create a 10-step collateral checklist about your vision, your mission. And because your people are always going to be asking you, why do you want to become a non-exec? What do you think you can contribute to us as an organization? So you've got to have clear answers. They've got to be ready in your head. And what I'm going to help prepare is kind of like a kind of a deck of questions and answers so that you can look over before you go into interview, or before you write your CV, you know, before you write your cover letter if that's required. So we're going to be looking at how do you update your online presence. And again, if it's not the right time now to do that because you are a full-time employee, you come back to BCKR and me anytime in future. We will always support you with this when the time is right. Next week, I'm going to be showing you how you do a video elevator pitch. It's very, very useful. LinkedIn offers this. You put a video clip up there and say, hi, why should you consider me as a non-exec? Now, maybe you don't put it up there, but it's something you need to have a script ready for. How do you search for roles? And then how do you create reference stories? And the whole idea is you're always going to be asked, tell me, give us an example of what you have done. This is the format of how you create examples, give security to anyone at the other side of the table. Session 3, how do you actually apply for roles? How do you speak to HR or the gatekeeper? How do you get through the gatekeeper? Sometimes you'll be going direct, but sometimes you'll have to go through an application process. How do you apply for roles and demonstrate excellence required in the job description? How do you prepare a CV? I'm going to help you create a generic non-exec CV that you can then adapt to the job description in future. How do you get your cover letter right? Do you include the right non-exec director competencies in there? And do you give reference examples that support what you're saying? Then we do a little bit on interviewing. Just how do you prepare for the interview? How do you show that your style fits with the culture of the organization? And that's, you just have to ask a few questions. What's the style here? You know, how do you want me to work here? What do you want me to do when I challenge? Is there any advice you can give? So with all these sort of questions to gain clarity. And then session 5, you get through the door. How do you manage relationships in the boardroom? I've seen many people get through the whole process and fall flat on their face because their style in the first meeting the process and they're asking too many difficult questions, and you've got to manage that relationship. And we're going to be talking here about pain. It's a concept I love. How do you understand the organization's pain and bring solutions at board level, make sure that those pains and the problem stakeholders have are actually solved. So that's what we're going to be doing throughout the program. And you come back to, yes, Rebecca.
Neil, can I ask, can I ask a question from my perspective, bearing in mind that I've had a certain number of years out?
Yeah.
So how it seems to be like a little bit, is it chicken and egg that, you know, you have to get that first role in order to be able to show any of your competencies as in terms of what they're looking for, or, you know, how do you get to that point? Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm in a situation where I haven't.
That was going to be my question as well, because I actually, a lot of roles I have seen, because I get the BCKR notifications telling you about roles, and a lot of the ones I've seen ask for previous experience. And I did actually apply for a role recently because it was very much, it was for the copyright licensing agency, and I'm an IP lawyer, so it was very in my field, although I appreciate that, you know, I was a bit concerned that I wouldn't have enough experience, but it did ask for previous experience. And that was something I found really difficult to, you know, is there a way that you can overcome that, even if it asks for previous experience? Is that still something you can overcome?
Mm-hmm. Well, everyone has been there and done that, and you have to overcome that. Now, Elizabeth, before I come to you, I'm going to give my splurb. Look, a number of routes that people take. What is the difference between a school governor, a trustee, and a non-exec? Well, there's none. So they're all the same. So maybe you can start off as a trustee or as a school governor. Exactly the same role. Now, the issue is trustees, non-execs, trustees and governors, you normally don't get paid. But on this course, I'm going to be saying, well, how do you actually get paid? Now, maybe there's a route to take to gain the experience. Maybe you'll want to be a school governor or a trustee. So that's one route. So that's something you may decide to go down. The other route is, and I've seen this happen a lot, how do I gain the experience? People go to their friends, say, could you put me on the board of your company so that I can say I am a trustee or some sort of a board advisor or even a non-exec. Now, if you are registered anywhere as a non-exec, you will be registered on Companies House. So you are, your name is put there as a non-exec director, and it is registered at Companies House. So people can find out very quickly whether what you were saying is true or not. So if you are saying that, look, if you have any contacts and family members and they have a small business, you can put down, I am a non-exec, or I'm a board advisor, or I'm a trustee. But you've got to have your details registered by them at Companies House. And that's one route that I've seen people take. Rebecca.
So in my case, so I am school governor, and I'm in the process now of interviewing for the Assistant Advice as a trustee. So what, I guess that was my question. So if you have done that type of school governor trustee stuff, even though I haven't been in legal work, do they actually take that seriously? Do they say, that's great? Or do they say, well, what else have you done? And we're not interested in your legal experience for 5 years.
No, I think they will take the whole thing into account. Normally they will take everything into account, and they know very full well that a board governor and trustee is exactly the same as a non-exec. That's my experience. And it's things like, Elizabeth was saying that she is the chair of the REM committee. So when you are a governor, chair committees, because that's really critical. You become a non-executive director, you will be chairing committees. That's part of the role. Nearly always, it's a guarantee. So if you can say, well, look, I've been chair of the governor's committee at school, they love that. And it's exactly the same principles, exactly the same. But remember, I'm kind of thinking here, well, how can I create a portfolio career and get paid for it? Because, I work with so many people and they work very hard and they say, no, I'm not getting any money for it. And after a while, they feel they're giving all their time up. If you've got money, great. But if you need to make a living and pay your bills, well, you've got to try to get that balance between, well, how do I get a paid job? And if I have spare time, I can be a board governor or a school governor or a trustee. But it's getting that balance right. And from my experience, you become a trustee, often they suck the life out of you because they just take all your time. They love taking your time. And if you're good, they will grab it. And, how do you balance that between making a living and giving? Now, did I answer your question?
Yes, definitely.
Very good. Very, very good.
Very good to hear that, actually. It's very reassuring.
But you've really got to explain clearly what you are doing as a school governor and how that aligns to the requirements listed in the job description. But there is definite alignment in my experience. Elizabeth, do you have any comments to make?
I think I would only add that not everybody has experience, and there are plenty of people who get their first role, so it must happen. I completely agree with Niall that they care more about what you do than what your titles were. But equally, when you say, do they take it seriously? Are you going to get serious consideration for a non-exec role at BP based on being a school governor? No. Are you going to be able to be on the board of a local Abbeyfield? Probably yes. So there is a sense of step building as well in all of this. And I would say in that context, which I suppose I sort of alluded to earlier as well, that you have to work out the purpose of what you're after. And I know, for some it will be financial, for some it will be community giving, for some it will be pure intellectual satisfaction. And working out what each role offers in that and some, frankly, to start with, it's CV building. Working out which step offers which of those is important, and they will need different things along the route. But, you know, on the IP front, there are many IP lawyers, but if you've worked with startups and can persuade one of them that you want to be a consultant, or then an advisor, and then why don't you put you on the board because you've got, in my case, more grey hair than them or whatever, then suddenly you've got ways in that build on the sort of legal world and contacts usefully. You're on mute now.
Yeah, I'm just going to read out. I've a lawyer that I'm working with, and now he's in his mid-70s. Now, the oldest person I work with is 85, and he has got a board advisor job. But he was very big in finance. But this lawyer, he applied for a job, a public role with the trade, the new trade department, you know, with Brexit and all that. And he applied for a job as a non-executive director with this new trade board. Now, as a lawyer, he said, I don't understand why this board needs kind of non-exec directors. So he wrote to the recruiter after they had turned him down. And he said, why does this board want non-exec directors? And there's just two little things here. They said the whole thing is about the TRA must be independent, and that's why they need non-execs. But the rates of pay are clearly not commercial. But most candidates, now this is my point, but most candidates are attracted to such roles for reasons that have nothing to do with remuneration. And I thought that was actually very interesting, that they want to attract people, maybe, you know, in this government bodies that don't pay commercial rates, but they pay decent rates. And I think there they were paying about £15,000 a year for that role. But we're going to discuss all this, and it's getting that balance all the time. You must make those decisions. And so we'll come through and answer all those questions as we go through. Anything else before we move on? Okay. In between sessions, look, you know, there will be course material. I'm going to put that up onto our private LinkedIn group. Also, the sessions I record them. And I don't expect you to go back, but I'm leaving them there up on our private LinkedIn group. And I'm going to invite each of you. I'm going to connect with you on LinkedIn today. And I'm going to invite you to this private group. Now, everything is left on that private group for the immediate future. But you can connect with each other and with me and with Elizabeth and those at BCKR through there at any stage, in case you don't have our email and you can't find it or whatever. All the course material will be uploaded to there. Now, everything on the LinkedIn site is set up as a PDF. It just automatically goes up. Put it on Word, it comes up as a PDF. So I'm going to email you the Word documents that you need to read. And I'm going to suggest you read. Now, some of them are quite meaty, but I will say just read pages 17 to 24, whatever. I'm going to focus that. But there's a lot of background reading that you will need to be aware of and use in your CVs, in your applications, or in any meetings you have when applying for roles. I'm going to ask you to complete the preparation. Now, this is not a test, but I'm just going to keep it as short as possible. But you just need to be aware of the key distinctions between being an executive director and a non-executive director. And that's the purpose of any prep that I send you. And I'm going to ask you to connect, really network with each other, use each other's connections. Now, on the last program, we had Richard Macklin, who's the vice chair of Dentons. He said he will come back on, but he's been very helpful to people on these courses in opening doors. He's been really brilliant. And we're going to ask Richard along during the program so that he can share his experience, but you network with him and his network. I'm really going to suggest that that's a key route into all this, and Elizabeth has supported that. But so connect with each other. We've seen your connections in the invitations that Nicola sent out. And maybe in future, we'll have a lunch, cup of coffee, if that's relevant. Or if anyone wants to meet, that's up to you. No problems with that. Who am I? Look, I've been doing programs like this for too long enough that I can remember. I am not a mind reader, I'm not a human Google, but I will answer any questions, and I'll ask Elizabeth and Tim and Richard Macklin, anybody else to help out. I'm here to offer you support, challenge, and guidance. And you come back to me at any time with your CV. I want at the end of this, my real mission is that you have a generic CV, you have a generic cover letter, and that you have a guidelines what to answer questions. Say, why do you want to become a non-exec? What can you contribute to us? What experience do you have? How do you answer those key questions? I just want this whole program to be as stimulating as possible and as enjoyable as possible. You can connect with me. There's my contact details. Reach out anytime. Just reach out anytime. And by the way, if you use Zoom, you can go to the annotate button at the top. And you can just, if you do that, do you see there the save button? Go to your annotate button, and to the right, there is a save button. You see that? Do you have, at the top of your page, do you have the annotation? It's kind of like a marker.
No, I don't seem to.
Do you know? Okay, it's funny. Okay, so I have it on my screen. I don't know why that is, but
I have the annotate button, but I can't seem to see where.
But you click on the annotate, Rebecca, and do you see save there on the far right? And you've got a whole list of.
I've got that, yeah.
Well, if you hit that save button, you can just take a screenshot, and it saves it to your PC. And if you see something of interest here, a particular slide, you say, oh, I'll take a snap of that. Just go to your annotate button and click on the save, and it'll save it as a PNG file on your computer, on your desktop. Little things. Okay, that's fine. Okay. The way we work, hopefully very fast-paced. I'm going to try and build as much momentum in all this, but I would love you, please, to connect and support each other. And we're going to do that when you have your CV, we're going to share it. And I'll put that back. I'm going to ask each of you before session 3, send me your current CV. How many of you have an up-to-date CV? Horrible thing to do. Anyone's up-to-date CV? Well, Rebecca, very good. Okay. Well, look, and then I'm going to turn that into a non-exec CV because it's very different. And if somebody wants a consulting CV, you ask me. Different, and then I'm going to share with you cover letters. We're going to share those out with each other so that you can give feedback. I cannot write my own CV. I just can't do it. But I find it easy to write other people's CV, and maybe you can give each other feedback. No, it's the way of the world. I never do my own stuff. Okay, and really throughout the program, and I don't think this is going to be a problem, but I'm going to be asking you to demonstrate the attitude of a non-exec director. And the reason why I put that in, I've been doing online programs like this for 5 years, but some people just are so argumentative. And I don't mind people being argumentative, but they come across as so negative. And I said, look, nobody will ever buy into you as a non-exec because you're just the glass is always half empty. It's never half full. People won't want to work with you. They have choices out there. And then I find out these people have medical problems, and that's fine. Once you know that. But I'm always going to be saying, is that really, are you demonstrating a non-exec director behavior? Okay. Over to you guys. And maybe Rupert, I start with you. And then Rebecca, you, and then Abby, and then Elizabeth, if you want to add. I know you've added a lot already, but can you please just tell us about yourself, where you are, what's your location, what's your job title, and your present situation? What sectors do you work in? And that's important because we'll be thinking in future, well, what sectors of non-exec roles might you be seriously considering? Then what is your career background? What are your career plans? And what are two to three attributes that underpin your value as an NED? No judgment today. Rupert, over to you.
Right. Rupert McInnes. I currently live in North Hampshire, work-wise based in normal times between Old Street and Nottingham. general counsel for Capital One in the UK, which is a credit card business in the UK. Parent American listed full retail service bank, probably number 7 or something. It's quite significantly smaller than the big 6 in the States, but is big. Present situation, general counsel. So I actually look after legal, compliance, and external affairs, which includes so regulations, data protection, corporate social responsibility, compliance, legal, conduct risk, AML. I don't know. I think that's probably about it. A bunch of stuff. A team that's split between London and Nottingham, so I have about 6 people in London and about 70-ish people in Nottingham, split relatively evenly between legal and compliance, with like 5 people to do the external affairs stuff. That's probably it. Sector, so retail, unsecured lending, fairly niche in the sense of it's just credit cards. We have had other businesses in the past, but we are now focused just on credit cards. Been at Capital One for nearly 20 years. So joined, moving on to bullet 2, joined from Allen & Overy, where I was a litigator and regulatory lawyer, and joined in the legal function, doing litigation and reg stuff, and then just picked up bits and bobs over the years. I'm company secretary, so sit in all the board meetings, though not with the hat on of a director, though in effect, look to try and participate as much as the other directors do. They don't seem to draw much of a distinction, though I guess in my mind I know there is a distinction, particularly when you get into the regulatory world of SM and CR and all that sort of fun stuff. Successively relevant to career direction. So career plans and career direction. I guess I've got a fairly broad set of risk experience and expertise, as I've mentioned, both across sort of legal compliance and reputation. I have been the chief risk officer at a point in time before the world got very much more focused on 3 lines of defense and clarity of that. In relation to the sort of connected, areas of governance, I suppose, I've been chair of Trade Association Management Committee for 3 or 4 years, and now chair of the UK Finance Cards Policy Committee. Have done some school governing in the past, but no longer, and also been on some management committees of various sports clubs that I'm involved with. So plenty of sort of governance and reg exposure and advice. Obviously team leadership with a fairly large team, albeit of course I have people supporting me on that. And then I guess the other sort of connected things within employment that I do, as I said, responsible for our corporate social responsibility, responsible for our environmental activity and some mental health support programs. Future career plans, not really very sure, to be honest. Been at Cat One clearly for an awfully long time. It's probably time I gave the role to somebody else, preferably a woman, help with our women in finance commitments. Now I'm probably all right for a little bit, but it's there's time, and there is time to move on at some point. And interested in getting greater experience in relation to what it might be like, I guess, on the other side of the board table to some degree, and seeing if that would be an interesting string to have to the bow, but also maybe some experience outside of, at some point, outside of sort of law, reg, FS, except there may be a stepping stone to be made. So I'm sort of looking out, I guess, as to what I might do over the next year, 18 months, rather than like tomorrow. Attributes, I think, being a part of a second line function for a long time, so that sort of support and challenge thing is hopefully fairly well ingrained. Very much as an in-house lawyer for a long period of being, needed to be sort of commercially engaged, and ultimately coming back to your points of the lawyers being the no people, I don't think that would have stood me in terribly good stead had I been in that position, but worse versus I understand the business objectives, trying to support you to get to there, albeit in a well-governed and compliant fashion. And so sort of see myself as a facilitator. And then I think the other big thing that came out for me, amongst others, was around the sort of team player, very much wanting or having adopted and enjoying a sort of partnerial way of working alongside my first and third line colleagues. So see it as a group enterprise rather than me just being an advisor on the side chucking rocks. So that's a quick spin.
But look, it seems to me that you have all the necessary attributes, and you have a lovely style. You know, people will warm to you very quickly. And this facilitation, ambassadorial, all this sort of stuff, you have a lot of strengths, but you've got to utilize that 12 to 18 months to really use it as a kickstarter, springboard into your career. And I'll support you with that, no problem. Rupert, thank you. Rebecca?
Yeah, I'm not really sure how to follow with that, Rupert. That was pretty impressive. I'm not sure mine is going to be quite so broad. I was trained at Freshfields, so Freshfields training contracts, qualified into banking. I worked there for 8 years as a banking sort of general finance lawyer. M&A did a lot of acquisition finance stuff. Moved to Debevoise and Plimpton as a senior associate there, and then moved on from there after I did more securitization work there, I guess. It was the US firm. Then moved on to Sidley Austin, where I was head of training, and just headed up their training function and doing a bit more marketing, the PSL type role. And then we did a bit of corporate social responsibility stuff there as well before I was leaving. That was around the time that Lehman's happened. So that was a bit of a tricky period. And then, since then, really, I left there. We live in Sussex. So moved out of Sussex, and I haven't been in work in the city for a few years now. With 4 kids, the little one is now at school, and now thinking that it's about time that I took a bit of time back. In the meantime, I have done quite a lot of other bits and pieces. I mean, as we were talking about before, I've done school governor stuff. I'm the chair of a few smaller committees in around the area that we live in. I think it's just something that now I'm getting the chance to have more time to get myself back in again. I'm not really keen to go back into a legal role. Probably wouldn't find it necessarily that easy to get back into a legal role. I don't really know, but I don't really want to go back to full time. So now looking at, in terms of I guess what I'm looking to do now is just consider
the options.
And so I kind of, for me, it's more like I want to do something locally. So it's not really that I want to come back into the city or go back into working for bigger corporates, but I am interested in staying local. So I have done, as I said, some school governor stuff, and I'm also now kind of doing the assistant advice trustee stuff, which is around the Horsham and West Sussex district. So I'm really enjoying that. I'm also actually, in that time that I have not worked, qualified as a personal trainer, actually, which took me into mental health. So actually, I'm quite into mental health, and I'm really interested more in mental health in the sort of teenage area and senior schools and that area. So the education sector is something I'm really interested in. And again, have worked in some schools, doing various things within the school that my children are at the moment, and other schools too. So I guess this is new for me. This is not something that I've done before, and hence why I've found myself here to get a little bit more experience in actually that non-exec role. But it's quite reassuring to hear that the trustee stuff will help with that in this more local area. I'm not thinking too big. I'm just thinking of how to sort of develop what I'm already doing, I guess.
Good, good. And will definitely help you to be prepared and kind of register yourself as a serious candidate. I'm always interested. Do you come across as a serious candidate? And my final question for you, Rebecca, is, trustee roles, great, no problem. Governor roles, great. Are you looking for paid roles?
No.
Okay, fantastic. Well, that's really easy then. That's really easy. Okay, no problems. Okay, definitely be able to help you there. That's fine. Perfectly good. Okay, thank you so much for that. Abby?
I'm Abby Minns. I am based in South London, in Battersea. So my current job title or present situation is that, let me talk through my history, is probably a bit easier. So I am an IP lawyer. I trained and qualified at Bird & Bird. I then moved to Osborne Clarke, partly because one of the partners there had moved to help kind of grow the IP team there, particularly on the patent side. And going back into my even earlier days, I was a biochemist, so I have quite a strong life sciences technical background, although having said that, at Bird & Bird I did quite a broad range of IP, so I've kind of dabbled in a bit of everything. And then whilst I was at Bird & Bird, the life sciences sector was declining slightly, and it's been a big incline in the telecoms world, so I've also done a lot of telecoms patent litigation. So I moved to OC, was there for a couple of years, went on maternity leave, came back, and then went on maternity leave the second time and decided that I didn't want to go back working in private practice. And I'd been contacted whilst I was on maternity leave by a consultancy, legal consultancy firm, and it kind of got me thinking about that way of working. I then also got contacted by an ex-colleague at Bird & Bird who was now partner at A&O. And he wanted me to go and work at A&O, but I'd already had my head firmly set in the consultancy idea, and he introduced me to Pierpoint. And so my first role as a legal consultant was through Pierpoint, but working for A&O's IP litigation team. So doing a very similar job, but on a consultancy basis, so giving me a bit more flexibility as to how I work and when I work, and a lot more flexibility in terms of remote working, which obviously now is not such big, becoming less of an issue, certainly, but even a year ago was still a bit more challenging. And then also I, again, through a couple of other contacts, had signed up with a couple of other small firms. Another ex-Bird & Bird colleague had started her own small firm, and she wanted some assistance on the IP side. And then more recently I've signed up with a couple of, another boutique firm, which was started by two corporate lawyers who again were getting more and more IP queries. And then more recently through a firm called Nexa, which is more of a kind of keystone type model, where the idea is that you run your own clients and businesses through them. So I'm now I'm still working a little bit for A&O, and I'm also now doing some work for HGF, another IP firm, and doing, again, just supporting their IP practice. But in the background, I'm trying to build up my own client base, build up my own, start my own IP work. And as part of that, I'm launching an IP service, because what I've noticed is that a lot of the IP queries I get are coming from kind of startups or scale-up companies, and they're either coming to me because they've hit an IP issue either with a third party, or they've gone to register a mark and then have had problems with it, or because they've gone to get funding, and then the funders have raised certain questions, kind of saying, well, can you actually protect this? What about if third party copying it and things like that? And so the idea of my IP service is it's kind of trying to get those people before they hit the issues and kind of look at their IP. For startups, kind of giving them a very basic, fixed fee type look at their IP and telling them, right, this is what you might want to think about now, this is what you might think about in the future when you have a bit more money, and these are your kind of key risk areas. And then for the people that might be getting a bit more funding, again, similar kind of model, but a bit more detail, telling them what the investors might be looking at, and kind of giving them a bit of a package to go to their investors and say, look, we've thought about this, we know what our strengths and weaknesses are, etc. And also another thought I'm having is perhaps trying to target the investors. So looking at going to venture capital firms and saying, before you go and invest in companies, I can do a kind of IP audit and assess the risk of what you're investing. So that's kind of where I am now. But as part of that, so the non-executive director roles kind of come in, I think, as I said, probably more in the future, but I'm kind of getting, through what I'm doing, had quite a lot of interest in how businesses work, and kind of see that as something in the future that I'd be quite interested in being involved in. So that's I guess my career plan is to expand on the building up my own client base, hopefully have some success with the IP service I'm trying to launch, and then maybe longer term, looking at the non-exec positions. Attributes that underpin my value as a NED, I guess. Part of my background as an IP and as a patent lawyer has been kind of understanding the kind of complex technology. So sometimes I'll have to look at a patent in an area that I haven't ever looked at before. So I guess, being able to pick up complex and difficult technical situations is something I've had quite a lot of experience. So I guess being able to pick up things quite quickly in that sense, and understand them, and then put them understand it in a commercial situation as well. And also, I guess, my interest and understanding of the way businesses work from the kind of startup position, and kind of as the life cycle grows, I would hope would also be a good attribute as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Having this kind of consulting background where you can come in and quickly analyze a situation, that's so useful for non-execs. You've got to show acumen in so many areas rapidly. That's a fantastic attribute to have. So I'm hearing from you, Abby, you're looking at really the consultancy, developing your business, getting fees, kind of getting paid for that. And the non-exec, you mentioned startups, fintechs. In my experience, they would love to have somebody like you as a non-exec. Now, they might not think in terms of non-exec, but some sort of advisor, which really is a non-exec. That's really a route to go.
Yeah,
and I'll support you with that.
That's part of what I'm thinking, that through what I'm doing, and that's where I might think my interest lies as well, in kind of helping those kind of businesses grow, and but understanding the technical side of it as well. That's what I'd be quite interested in doing. I mean, for me, in terms of so other people have suggested, kind of doing the trustee or charity type roles, which I'm not. The only problem with me at the moment, which is why, again, I'm looking more longer term, is because of the way I'm working. I'm actually still only working part-time because my kids are only 2 and nearly 5. I just don't, because of what I'm doing, because my time is limited, I just think to also then give up extra time and not be paid for it. Yeah. I think I would struggle at the moment, but that's not necessarily something further down the line that I wouldn't consider. But at the moment, I'm kind of looking at building on what I can do in terms of getting experience, how I can position myself for further down the line now, without actually necessarily having to give myself too big a time commitment when I'm quite busy.
And the one thing, and this is for you too, Rebecca, as a trustee, you can get paid roles. So if you're a governor in the school and they have a particular issue, you have skills, given your training background and all that sort of stuff, they will happily pay you. There's no conflict of interest there. Once it's managed properly and openly, but basically that's how I get a lot as a trustee. I earn a lot of income.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that, I wouldn't welcome being paid, of course, but that's not the reason why.
Not a priority. Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Lucky you. That's fantastic. And would get paid roles for you in the future? Is that what you're thinking?
It would be very handy. Yeah,
fine. Very good. Very good. Okay. Elizabeth, any comments from you, given everything we've heard? Thank you, Abby.
No. Obviously, there are, from a Rupert background, there are many, many more opportunities within the commercial sector for lawyers with a proven track record in sort of compliance and risk and regulatory side. They are wanted in some areas if you get to the right headhunters and you come with the right credentials. I think the sort of ability to work with the smaller companies and a private sector arena, in my mind, is useful for the bits that I enjoy most in my non-exec sphere now. I would also say that the sectors you have worked in historically don't need to dictate what happens in the future. And it's sort of up to you how you direct yourselves. I mean, I took Great Portland Estates. I knew nothing about the real estate world. Since then, pretty much everything is tangential to the real estate world by chance. And then you choose to build on it and use it accordingly. But I certainly wasn't a property lawyer or knew anybody on that board or sector. I quite liked sort of Rebecca's tales of, I have already changed. I have already not a lawyer. And that's really, rather than being sort of defensive and I haven't worked for donkey's years, instead, you know, they can make their own mind up about whether you are working or not. You instead say, this is what I did during this period. I retrained as a personal trainer. I'm really interested in mental health. I've chaired various committees locally. I mean, that strikes me as, you know, if you take, say, a housing association, there are local housing associations where they want that next stage, and you've already got the sort of, the mental health brings you straight into, if you choose to, the you know, not just the well-being airy-fairy type of life, but actually the social need type of life. And you can speak to that, and you will have seen it. You'll have seen it through schools, be it, you know, frankly, Eton downwards. They've all got issues, and therefore you've already got more on your plate. And you know that will come, Abby, when you do it differently with small companies and different problems. And again, when you've seen small companies develop and different problems on the consulting front, you talk about the different sectors. You don't say, I'm an IP lawyer.
Yeah, that's basically how I feel, because I didn't really want to have to, I don't want to try and resurrect my legal career necessarily. I wanted to be able to say, look, I have been a lawyer, I have all this experience from being a lawyer, but actually what I'm now looking to do is something completely different from that.
Well, yeah, but it's not, I am now wanting to change from being a lawyer, because you've already changed.
Yeah, because I guess having had that break in the middle, there's no point in me trying to say, well, 10 years ago, I worked on this massive securitization job, which, you know, blah, 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 because, you know,
they don't care.
No, exactly. No, it's certainly not where I'm looking to go.
They don't care even at Odgers, at Cannon Street. I mean, they just don't care. All they do is give you, okay, so they'd see Freshfields ever, and they'd say, okay, intellectual tick.
Yeah.
And that's it. Yeah. It's really disappointing, but it's true.
Yeah, which is why I'm kind of, you know, not I don't, you know, it is what it is. I've done that, and it's
and the good thing,
really what I want to do.
You know, the good thing is that there will be local committees outside London where they are looking for people who, well, you've already talked about chairing, you know, who've clearly got a professional background, who don't want to use it. What have you got in Horsham? The I don't know, the Colliers, the biggest sixth form college, highly respected. They, you know, that's not a school governor. That's a hugely successful international organisation that happens to be a sixth form college.
Yeah, actually, that's exactly what I'm looking at. So
yeah, that is you know, that's the sort of thing. And then once you've done that, you've seen people problems and, you know, constant regulatory change, and so on.
Very good. Okay, very clear. And so thank you very much for that. You've all given a very clear path to the future. Okay, non-exec, trustee, school governor, it's all about governance. And I'm going to email you some information that you'll need to get into your head or have access to before you go to any meetings to discuss a role. And everything is set out in the UK Corporate Governance Code. And it keeps evolving. The last update was 2018. I'm just going to highlight the key things that are in here. And you'll see when you apply for board roles, they will want you to have knowledge of this. They don't go into it in detail, but you've got to understand what corporate governance is all about and which codes, they're really not very different, but which codes apply to which sectors. Sector governance can be slightly different. Each sector may have its own codes, but usually everything is based on the UK Corporate Governance Code, last updated 2018. You must be familiar with these codes, but they don't tell you how to be a successful board member. You must be aware only of the differing regimes, whether you're in public sector, private sector, where you're known as a non-exec, or the trustee, or the not-for-profit or charity sector, where you're called a trustee or a school governor. That's the only difference. There's no difference between the two, but just which sector you are in. So be familiar with the codes, and I'm going to email you those today. The public sector, if you apply for a public sector role, they always talk about the principles of public life. 7 principles, they are the Nolan principles. You just need to be aware. And I will constantly remind you of those. But you get an application for a public sector role, they will always have listed the principles of public life. And they say you must demonstrate your knowledge and the attributes you can apply to really implement those. For large private family companies, the weight principles are typically the corporate code, the governance code that they use there. Not-for-profit charity governance codes from the Charity Commission and guidance for trustees. It's all there, and I'm going to put all this information up into our private group for you to look at when it's relevant. You may also, or should be, you're more likely these days to be asked to sign a code of conduct. And Guy sent me a sample trustee code of conduct. Why I'm going to mention these, and I'll spend time on these in the future. If I go into a business, I say, do you have a code of conduct? Well, I might introduce one if I'm going into a small private business or a startup, and I can bring this information to make sure that we're all singing from the same hymn sheet. When I go into work, I said, well, is there any guidelines here? How should the board conduct itself? Are there board guidelines? Is there a code of conduct? This just clarifies things. So I'm going to share all this information with you, and then we're going to go through and see how you apply that to secure roles. And the whole point is about, well, what does good corporate governance look like? You know, good corporate governance. And I'll come to that in the next slide. But good corporate governance is the reason you are participating as a trustee, as a board member, as a governor. You're there to bring good corporate governance. About the way the organization culture, cooperation, whatever, the values and tone of the business. Can I tell people around that board table what I really think, or do I tell people what they want to hear? It's really about that tone, and you creating that tone. Your input, and this is your job as a non-exec or as a trustee or the board governor, monitor, challenge the executive. We'll come to that later on too. They're all about policy making, managing risk, looking at operational performance, looking at compliance, all the things that you've mentioned. So you have a lot of the skills and attributes required here. So, and then against the commercial side, the financial rigor. If you can demonstrate kind of attributes and experience in as many of these areas, you'll be a very valuable board member. Now, of course, not everybody has that broad reach, but that's why you have a board with people with different skills and different strengths that they can share around the board table. So you want to kind of a good cross-section of people, but that's your job. Manage, monitor, not to manage, I should say, but to monitor, to challenge, to be an ambassador, to look at compliance, to look after the stakeholders' interests and the interests of end users. Then you look at reputation. I've heard you mention reputation, a few of you, but it's really about managing the reputation of the organization and looking at the communication flow. Is what the business presents to the marketplace, to its stakeholders, is it fit for purpose? You can be looking at that as a non-exec. And then looking as a committee member, there will be committees, usually an audit, succession, remuneration, whatever. You will, in my experience, be heading up one of those board committees. I'm sure Rebecca in the school, you're already, you know, they have lots of committees. And in my experience, school governor boards are fantastically, I've been in a few, they are so well run. You can use that skill elsewhere. Really, they are so well done. I've really enjoyed being part of those. But remember, just all I want to say here is each sector will have their own governance principles, but usually are based on, or they're always based on the UK corporate governance code. But you just need to be aware of that. Nothing more, nothing less. What does good look like? Good corporate governance. Well, nobody can agree. There is no magic wand here. But it really is all about having an effective and successful board. You know, and that really is about maintaining long-term viability of the business. You know, strong leadership and mentoring with really good decision-making. You know, looks after long-term interests of stakeholders. Clear mission, vision, and strategic plan. Clear culture, you know, behaviors and values, clear accountability and metrics for all involved in the business. Now, I've been part of boards where decisions were made, and I found this particularly in the charity sector. Decisions were made, but actually the board decisions never taken into account. The owners of the charity simply made up their own decisions. We had board meetings, but never accounted for anything. And that's where you really want to manage that. You are in there as a non-exec or as a trustee. So that's your job to kind of simply say, this is not fit for purpose. Challenge those. That's what we need to do. Any questions?
No, I'll be fascinated at some point, not necessarily today, to hear more about that, just in relation to when you have situations where there's a need for a non-exec, but they don't really want the non-exec there, or don't really want the challenge, or like to pretend they want the challenge, but don't really want to listen to it or deal with it.
Well, they want the input, but actually they don't want the kind of the rigor around it. And you'll find, I found just very briefly at charities, I'm very mindful that they'll say one thing to you, and you go in the door and you find out so much more that's hidden that they just don't tell you. And remember, you are listed in the company's house. You have responsibilities, but you've got to understand that full remit. So what I'm going to be saying to you later on in the course, I never make a decision to sign a contract until I have my feet under the table and I know everything that's going on, and I talk to all stakeholders before I sign. I would never have a problem with that at schools, but with charities, in my experience, they just don't tell you, and particularly religious charities. You know, they're religious. They're not commercially minded. You know, you have to understand that. I'll come to that again, Rupert. Influence. Your influence as a non-executive director. And look, you have guidelines. It's not about rules. You know, but you've got to establish yourself. And this is where the behaviors come in. You must show your understanding of your role. If you don't, in my experience, public, private, they often don't know what the role of the non-exec is. So you have to be very clear and keep reminding them of that. You must demonstrate the right behaviors in a group situation to aid collective decision-making. So it's really a cabinet. You must gain trust, you must win confidence, you must act as an independent principal and individual. You're not a lawyer only or just an external advisor. You're there as an independent principal who is a decision maker. You must demonstrate those behaviors. And why is all that so important? I get all my jobs from board members recommending me to other boards that they are part of. And that's where the networking comes in. People will introduce you if you've got the right behaviors and you demonstrate the right set. It's all about getting on with people, building relationships. And just a few things here before we wrap up. How do you establish yourself and build those relationships? Avoid being negative. Never speak. And I've seen this, you know, I've seen this so many times. People just fall down or fall through the cracks because they talk negatively about people. It's one thing if they say it to people's faces, but often they're heard saying something about someone behind someone's back. I've seen people thrown out the door because of that. So these are the behaviors. You've got to be so careful. You know, when you have to make a decision, you seek facts before you make a decision. you don't go on hearsay. Don't tell others what to do. You know, of course, you're there to give advice and all that, but you must listen first to others' opinions before you bring your advice. Because if you just bring your advice, then they don't see you as a kind of a secure and trusty individual. And you're not there to give your opinions. Give your opinions, but after you've listened to others. Don't reveal to others what you possess. Just show interest in them. And I'm going to really kind of reiterate this in future, but really show interest in others. Don't talk about yourself unless they kind of ask you about that. Challenge constructively. Learn to contradict without coming across as negative or as a bully. So important. Remain independent and objective. Concentrate on realizing the board's goals. You must always keep that in mind. Concentrate on realizing the board's goal. Don't waste time on detailed problems that don't add to your effectiveness. And I see that a lot in the public sector. Small executive teams, huge numbers of trustees, they are always fighting. They just can never get on together because they don't concentrate on the board's goals or objectives. Start interfering with each other, going down roads they should never go down. Concentrate on what you need to do to ensure long-term viability of the business. And if you get gratitude, fantastic, but don't expect it. And particularly if you're a trustee or as a volunteer, people say after a while, nobody ever says thanks. Don't expect it. I just say to people, don't expect it. Give it, but don't expect it. You get it, enjoy it. Okay, challenges facing non-exec directors, being offered paid roles. And that's the challenge if you want to get off the ground. I'm going to help you with that. And we'll look at the balance, Abby, between all of us. Being paid, looking for non-paid roles. Creating confidence and security in your CV. You know, an up-to-date CV that really works and that gets through gatekeepers. When I say gatekeepers, it might be HR, it might be the recruiting organization, but you've got to get through them first, get through the interview, and then manage the relationship when you're in that boardroom. But create confidence and security in yourself. Trust based upon your ability, and this was you, Abby, to analyze and understand businesses quickly. You have very little time, but you must demonstrate from day one, I'm on top of things here. Trust based on you managing your relationships inside and outside of the boardroom and adapting to different personalities and being fair with everyone and finding the right way to influence and hold others to account. You know, I hold others to account. I know I'm doing a good job when people take action. A lot of people nod their heads and say yes, 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 but I'm always interested, have they taken into account what we have discussed at board level? Is there the action to support that? I'm always looking at that. Sometimes I find the actions taken are not what the board has agreed. And that's something I manage very hard. Very hard. And there you go, managing the balance. It's all about your ambassadorial. You really are an ambassador for the business and the reputation. And all I'm saying is empathy backed by data and metrics, awareness of the facts seen in context of people and behavior. You're independent, i.e. you have influence, but I want to see action and better outcomes for the whole business based upon your ability to influence constructively people around that table. And bring them with you, and you go with them. There you go. Now, I've thrown a lot at you in the last few slides, but we're going to develop that as we move forward. How do we manage that in practice? Elizabeth, or anyone, any comments before we wrap up? This is the last slide.
No, I would encourage you that, I say no and then start. I'd encourage you to hear some of the tales of different non-execs and different roles, broader perhaps than you were thinking that might appeal, because people always have interesting stories. They always have things to add on. So, you know, somebody might be going because they're announced as a speaker because they're chair of a multinational conglomerate, but they also help children in India, or things like that.
And that's very fair. And please come to us, ask for input. And this is the key thing. This is why we talk about networking, but ask people Who do you know who? Niall, can you introduce? Elizabeth, can you introduce? Do you know someone? And if we invite Richard Macklin on, well, he will come on, but, you know, ask for their support. And you ask, you will get. It's really clear. So just keep asking, you know, and then that's what I find. Just people don't ask enough. They start telling too much. Ask more. You will get help. For next week, and once I've connected with you on LinkedIn, I will invite you to our group, private group. Everything will be put up there, all the information, and I'll keep adding stuff. You can add to it too, no problem. Familiarize yourself with the 2018 UK Corporate Governance Code. I'm going to send you a copy of that today. Please read the Cohen Ferry report, What Makes an Effective Non-Executive Director. And if anybody wants, I have information on how to be a really great trustee from the Charity Commission. I'll send you all that. It's there in the background if you need it. I'm going to ask you to read the Principles of Public Life in Practice, the Nolan Principles, that's for public sector, and just connect with each other on the program. And from next week, I'm going to ask you to talk to each other and support each other. And next week, we come to the 10-step collateral checklist. There you go. That's session 1 done. Any questions from anyone? Is this what you expected? Or any ideas? What?
Yeah, I'm also relieved because but from my perspective, I know it's not the case for everyone here, but, I wanted to do it because I want to ideally get more experience in terms of the interviewing and the getting the roles, and in fact, just discovering more about it. So I'm really, it's not too sort of.
Yeah, and I realize, Rebecca, what we do here, maybe you have an interview in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. Just come back to me at that stage. And often what I do is people say, oh, no, I've got an interview, and I'll run it through with you online. And I'll prepare the question. So that's the help that you want, so that you come across with gravitas. We're here to help.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Very, very welcome. Okay, if I have no more questions to all of you. Oh, by the way, Elizabeth, Tim is coming on next week. Is he on for 9:30 next week, or is 9 o'clock okay? He prefers 9:30, doesn't he?
I don't know, I'm afraid. You'd have to check with Nicola. If it was half an hour later, is that problematic for people?
Better for me.
Better. Okay. Well, you can change the time, whatever. But I know Tim normally likes to start at 9:30, and we go through to 11. But I'll ask you next week to see if we can do that. If you can't, we can't. But I think he normally likes to start at 9:30. And if anybody would like to start, if you prefer 9:30, 9:15, let me know. I'll be flexible. Doesn't make any difference. We'll work around you guys. Okay, but I'll let you know. I'll ask you during the week. We'll send out an email. Let you know if you can start a little later next week.
Nice to meet you all as well.
Okay, take care.
Very
Thank you,
much.
everyone.
Thank you.
See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, thank
Bye.
you.
There.